for joining. Welcome everyone to Conversations with My Friends in AI. I am Claire Longo. I'm the host of this podcast. First thing I want to do is just introduce Jack. Jack and I met at Trunk Club. We were both working on the data science team. Trunk Club was one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. It's kind of a interesting thing because a lot of people that went through Trunk Club, their careers have kind of rocket shipped after that. So I'm really excited to bring Jack in and just hear his perspective.
Yeah. So the model was like, if you think about the business model of Trunk Club, which is now quite common, but at the time was very unique, which is shipping clothes, having people try it on and send back what they don't need. So, and then really one of the biggest problems that we had was clothes wouldn't fit people, even though they were like the correct sizes. And so what we were trying to do was to figure out before we sent out clothes, which sizes would fit people best. And the way that we would do it, or the way that Claire and I were approaching it, was we would say, based on the clothes that you've kept already, and based off of people who have kept those clothes, what is your like fit profile, and does it fit that piece of clothing? So it's sort of like a similar to like sort of a collaborative filtering model, essentially, was kind of like how we approached it.
Yeah, it was a really fun one to work on because it was one of the first models that I worked on where I got to see the results actually integrated into the business and kind of impacting that end customer. So yeah, it was a fun experience. Cool. Well, Jack, I'd like to pass it over to you. I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit about your background, a little bit about your story, and really what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Claire. So let me start back at the beginning, which for me was also Trunk Club. So yeah, like many others, Trunk Club was my first kind of quote unquote like real job. Like it was my first, job that wasn't like an internship or like sort of like a starter job. This was like the real thing. And for me at the time, this was back in 2015. I was a software engineer. So even earlier than that, back when I was in college, I had wanted to be a data scientist, but this was over 10 years ago. And at that time, data science did not have like a clear, trajectory for a career path, kind of like it does now, where there was no major in data science. There wasn't anything like that. I actually don't remember who even told me this, but at the time, it became clear to me that what I needed to do was to learn to program and essentially become a software engineer first before I started to become a data scientist. So that's what I did. I did a master's in software engineering, got a job in software engineering at Trunk Club, and I really enjoyed it. So I stuck with it for a couple of years. And maybe about 2 years in, 2.5 years in, I started to get that bug, that itch for data science again, where it was like, okay, I love software engineering, but there's something missing here, and it's that like mathematical, I don't know, like beauty behind data science and machine learning that I really crave, like intellectual stimulation.
Yeah, there's like a
And
creativity to
so,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. It's like there's no, I don't know, there's no great way to get it for me other than through this type of like that work. I think data science is like a really good cross between if you like to build things and you like to understand things. It's like those two things overlap very well in data science. Um, but yeah, so this was in maybe 2016, 2017 is when I did like a quote unquote like apprenticeship at Trunk Club, where I was already there, but I was like transitioning into the data team. So I did a couple projects, found my way onto the team. Claire was there at the time, and started working on some new models, including Plan Fit. Um, and then in 2018, I got a new job at Go Health. And so Go Health was a very different company where we were essentially Go Health is like they sell health insurance. So they're an in between for if you don't have an employer sponsored plan. So like, for example, like many Medicare recipients are no longer working. So they, who do they go to for their provider? What you would do is you would call into Go Health. They would have sales agents ready to take the call, and they would say, okay, based on your needs, like this is the best plan for you. So there was sort of like a marketplace for health insurance. And so when I went there, there was just barely a data team. So the company was fairly large. It was like 1,000 people, but like 600 sales agents. So really it was like 300 or 400 corporate people. So
Yeah.
about the same size as Trunk Club. But the data team was brand new and they didn't really have any like machine learning implemented. they had a couple data scientists, but the data scientists at the time were like very academic.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, I'm sure we've all been there as data scientists where at some point, you can build a model in Jupyter Notebook, but like then what? What do you do with it? It's
Yeah, and if you don't have the right
so
people with the right tools and skill sets around you to help you operationalize that, it can be really challenging.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so that's the challenge that they had. And so that's why they hired me, was they wanted someone who understood like machine learning, but also understood the data science side. Again, now this is very commonly called a machine learning engineer. At the
Yep.
time, that was like a very new term. Um, so I came on as the first machine learning engineer and was sort of like handed a model in the form of a Jupyter notebook and a bunch of SQL queries, and they're like, "Here, like deploy this." I'm like, "Okay, let me figure this out." And so the model that I was asked to deploy was it was called the lead scoring model, and what it did was it would prioritize people who were calling in or it would score people who were calling in based on their probability of actually needing health insurance. So the way that the business worked was people would call in and they would say, okay, I'm looking for A, B, or C, or I saw this phone number on the screen, something. The person who answered would ask you a few questions and be like, okay, let me find you with like the right person. At that time, they would enter that information into like an input form, and that would go into like our like call prioritization queue. And what my job was, or what this model's job was, is to take that queue and sort it based on the probability of actually needing it. Because people who are waiting on hold for someone are going to drop off after a certain amount of time. So what we wanted to do was to answer the calls that actually could purchase insurance first, so that they wouldn't drop off.
Sure. So you're essentially ranking a list, a queue based on a probability score.
Exactly. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. And so the model would basically just take in the information about a lead, it would score it. Based on that score, we would prioritize the queue. There's some more nuances to it, but for the sake of this discussion, you can think of it exactly as that. And so I was able to get that deployed. There was a lot of like challenges with that because we were using sort of like a very like legacy system, or at least like the framework that I was given to operate in was it was in Java, and like I couldn't
Okay.
implement like a Python model in it. So
Yeah.
I
Wow.
remember having to figure out, yeah, I had to figure out how to take like a pickled Python model, convert it into something that Java could interpret. So yeah, I won't go into details, but it was messy. But we got it working, and that model had like a huge amount of success. It like increased the profitability of the business model by like 15 or 20% just in the first run,
That's
which is crazy.
incredible
Like,
when you can measure
yeah,
that. You have something tangible to show for that effort. That's so incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I look back and I think um, I was unlucky in the sense that this was like the hardest time in my career because I was given
Yeah.
this like impossible task, which like, I'm not going into the details on it, but it was extremely difficult to get that deployed given the framework. But then when it worked, it was like, oh, that was so worth it
What a
because it
good
was like such
feeling.
a big lift to the company. Yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, and it really launched my own career because the fuel, like, that success of that project fueled, like, that rose all the way up to the CEO. Like he could see it, he could see like his own margins increasing because of this. And so, they got the machine learning bug and were like, let's expand, let's grow, let's do this more. And I was like the most senior person on it. I led that charge. And so a lot of trust was um, given to me, or at least like people trusted me to keep building on that. So I was given new projects, given more bandwidth. Eventually, I got promoted to manager. Kept doing that. None of the other projects we had that level of success, but we definitely had some very successful projects. But like, I mean, it's hard to beat 15% profitability, like
That
margin
is very hard
increasing.
to
That's
beat.
like a
Yes.
game
You
changing
set
business.
the bar high for yourself
Yeah,
there.
I know. Yeah, so never
Yeah.
achieved that level of success, but we did have a lot of success,
But the thing
and a good
that's
amount of
really
failures too.
cool to like hear when you talk me through that story, what I hear is that you came into a company that really didn't have much around like data science, machine learning, especially probably like machine learning, like ML ops infrastructure to like operationalize that model. And so that's building from the ground up. And there's so much opportunity to do that like across this whole field. Like if you just come in somewhere where maybe it's chaos, maybe they don't know what they're doing, maybe their models are not the best, maybe their deployment infrastructure isn't built yet, it's opportunity. You just start there and you start building, and it looks like it's kind of rocket shipped your career to do that. It's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry if there's any background noise in at my house, and I'm right next to the door. But
No worries.
in
That's
any
okay.
case, yeah, no, exactly. And so, like I said, I think it was, both some luck and some like unluckiness, and that, like, I remember like being like waking up in the middle of the night, like almost every night for like 2 or 3 weeks, dealing with like bugs that were coming up with the
Yeah.
project, and like this was something that like you couldn't ignore. I remember thinking like, what did I get myself into? Like, why did I join this company? Why did I do this? Like, I'm not getting, in spite of all of that, everyone's still yelling at me because it keeps breaking. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what am I doing here? But
I
then
have
it
a question
all,
for you
it
on
all
that.
worked out. Yeah.
Um, I've definitely been there. Like coming into a place like that and trying to really fix things. You've got PagerDuty waking you up in the night. You're like, what have I done? Um, but you successfully pulled through this, and it really was like it sounds like a really important moment in your career. What made you keep going? Like what gave you hope that you were actually able to fix this, that you had the amount of influence to fix it, you had the right people around you? What was really kind of encouraging you to keep at it?
Yeah. That's a good question. And I don't know that I've ever fully thought through that, but I would
You're
say,
just not a quitter,
I
I
think the
guess.
one, so I think part of it is that, like, if I'm going to give up on something, I need to know that it is like out of my control. And
Yes.
so, like, I still felt that, like, it was, again, very difficult, but things still were in my control. Like, I had the tools that I
Having
needed to do what I
impact.
needed to do. They
Right.
were, in my opinion, crappy tools, but
Right.
I still had them and I could understand them. So I was still able to get that done. And I think that's maybe where I draw the line between, like, okay, I cannot get through this. Is there
Yeah.
anything left that I can do to like make this succeed? And I still felt like there was. Also, like when you're like that far into a project and like you have some deadlines, it's like, well, I might as well stick it out through the deadline. So the way health insurance works is you have like an open enrollment season. So
Okay.
like we had a deadline to get it out, which is what made this so stressful. And then there was like a period of time where this mattered, and then it would end. So luckily for that
Gotcha.
situation, we had sort of like a specific time where anything beyond this time period doesn't really matter until next year. So
Yeah.
it's good. It's good in the sense that we had like a finish time, but also bad in the sense that it created a lot of stress to get things out.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, one more question for you because this is just fascinating. We will get into the real topic.
Yeah.
This is so cool to hear this.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just how long did it take you to take this model from like zero to hero, from like Jupyter Notebook to deployed and seeing that ROI?
Good question. um, so I remember I started in the middle of June in 2018. I think my start date was June 18th. I don't know why I remember that, but I'm almost
It's the
positive that it
trauma.
was
It's the
that
trauma.
date.
It's right there.
Yeah, maybe. Um, and then so my start date was June 18th, and then we had to get this out by August 15th, I believe, because the open enrollment season for the under 65 group, which is what we rolled this out to first, was 8 weeks after that. Or no, it was 4 weeks after that. And then I think over 65, which was the larger population, was October 15th.
Yeah.
I might be messing those dates up, but it's sometime around like October is that we had to have this thing like had been running for months or weeks. And then so I think the first deadline was mid-August. So we're looking at like about 8 weeks from like me starting at the company to getting it out. And I would say that maybe like the first 3 to 4 weeks were spent just like getting up to speed on
Yeah.
everything. So it's probably around 4 weeks to actually like build it out, all of the infrastructure needed for it.
That's incredible. Cool. We'll roll into the real topic. I'd love to hear just really quickly where you are today and the kind of stuff you're working on, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, for sure. Let me kind of just quickly gloss over the rest of this stuff
Yeah.
because it's not as interesting. I think I talked through more of the interesting parts, but yeah. So I stayed at Go Health for a few years. I got promoted to manager, started building out a team, got promoted to director, and built out a bigger team. We had some good success, and then I was looking for something like bigger, either bigger in terms of like my role or bigger in terms of the company, and like user base. I chose the company and user base and went to Wayfair.
Yeah.
That was a good experience, but not what I it's that size of a company is not for me. I really like smaller companies where I can just have like my hands in everything and kind of just like dictate the direction of what I'm doing. Wayfair, there's a lot of good about the company and the data science culture, but it's big enough where like you're kind of given the swim lane and you're asked to like swim in the swim lane. Um, like the team size, I had a team of 15. Where at that size of an organization managing that, it's really tough to do anything like IC related. It's really tough to stay up to date on like what's the latest models people are using, techniques, because you're dealing with so much overhead. It becomes very difficult to do that. So I did a 180 and went to a very small company after that, which is where I'm at now, which is Phi. So I'm the VP of data there. We've got a small team, but it's growing pretty fast. We're 4 people right now, soon to be 6. Phi, if you haven't heard of it, is a smart dog collar making company. So we make a collar that does GPS tracking, but it also does things like step count, miles walked, sort of like a Fitbit for dogs.
That's great. Yeah, I might need one. My dog's just chilling right here. She doesn't move around much, so probably wouldn't say much, but no, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump into the topic. So we're talking about strategies for leading data science teams. The first thing I want to really hear about is when you're joining a new company. It sounds like you come in as a leader at that leadership level a couple times. And it's a much different game than just like coming into a company and crawling your way up, because by the time you crawled your way up, you've earned trust. They know you. But when you come into a company as a leader, you have direct reports. There's a lot of challenges here around like just learning and gaining trust. So I'd love to hear about how you approach that and really how you're prioritizing things when you come into a new company.
Yeah, definitely. So it's definitely very different to grow into a leadership role at a company versus like joining as a leader. When you grow into a role, you kind of have like you have all of the IC knowledge that you need to like be able to make quick decisions about stuff. Like you've been in the code, you understand it completely because you probably built a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so being able to like manage that kind of a team, you have a lot of like advantages that way. When you join a team, for the first time, it's very uncomfortable because you kind of like feel like I don't deserve this, I don't belong here, I don't know anything, I didn't build any of this, yet I'm the one making all the decisions. So it's very uncomfortable in that sense. But what the approach that I've learned to take is first to not come in trying to make any decisions or like steer things in the right direction. It's going to be, for me, I have a lot of like impulses to like, oh, this is bizarre, we shouldn't be doing this, we should change. I've learned to fight those and to not do that, and to instead just kind of like learn, because a lot of the times what I'll come to understand is that things that at my prior role, which would have been like a very that would have been problematic, some system or strategy, at this company or this new company works for some reason, and it might be because there's other aspects that make it so. So I try and just kind of learn, listen and learn, and kind of like understand, as opposed to like set direction. I want to gain people's trust before I start asking them to do things differently.
Yeah.
In terms of like gaining trust, it's both like for your own team and for other leaders and other stakeholders and things like that. The more challenging aspect to me is always gaining the trust of like other stakeholders, because what everyone kind of expects of you, for example, as a data leader, is like you come in and then in day one, they have a bunch of questions about what they want to do with their data and like how they should access it, what the best like practices are. And I have a really hard time trying to like, I don't want to answer them for the same reasons that I just mentioned. Like, every company is different, and one best practice at another company might not make sense here. And so I try and answer the questions in a way that demonstrates like, yes, I can answer this, but I don't want to answer it yet. So I try and like walk that line carefully. But what I really try to do is I try to provide value to the company as soon as I can. So what that means is spending a lot of time understanding the business, just how it operates, the mechanics of it. But I don't care too much about, what technology we're using and understanding that necessarily. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand, how does the business operate? What are the key questions that we're trying to answer? What makes this run? What can I help solve? And so what I'll look for is things like low hanging fruit. So, something like, hey, we haven't been able to figure this out. Can you help us? An example at Phi was early on, we were trying to understand what was going on with NPS. It appeared to be like dropping and we weren't sure why. if you're not familiar with NPS is Net Promoter Score. So it's like a measure of like how happy, Claire, I know you know that, but like for anyone who's listening who doesn't
Yeah,
know,
totally.
it's basically a measure of customers, how happy customers are with the company. Um, and so if you see it drop, that's not a good sign, right? It means the customers are less happy. And so we're trying to understand why. And that was something where, if I had dashboards and stuff built around this, but they didn't have anyone who could go like deeper than that. And like, when the dashboards didn't answer the question, go deeper and answer it. So that's what I did. I just spent like a few days on it and was able to answer that. And that was very like enlightening to the business, not just like the actual answer, but like the fact that like, oh, we could go with something that seemed unanswerable and get an answer. That was like very powerful and moving, and like I gained a lot of trust and respect because of that. So I think being able to just, go deep into one thing and answer it and show that you can provide value is more important than trying to like, tell people best practices and stuff and
Mm.
pitch it like that. It's like if you can show value, that's way more important than anything else you're gonna be able to do. So that's what I try to focus on, is learning, understanding the business, providing value, avoiding making any major decisions early on until I really have full context for what's going on. And I try and do that for the first like couple months.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes total sense. I do want to peel back the layers on one of those things because it's something that
Mhm.
I find very challenging, and I've seen a lot of teams kind of struggle with. When you're talking about finding that low hanging fruit, sometimes I see it, it's right there, but I can see it through the data science perspective. I know I can solve this and that with data science, but the real challenge is to tie that back to business value and have something measurable, like figuring out the right metrics to feed up to show leadership why you're even solving this with data science. And I'm wondering if you have some tips and tricks on like really how to measure like ROI on these kinds of projects and make sure you're working on something that is measurable.
Really good question. So let me start by something like the specific example that I gave. So like when it's like a deep dive, I think the ROI, I try and articulate that in terms of like opportunity sizing. So like, I'm not solving anything just by answering this question. I'm giving information, but the ROI on this is, well, if we can connect NPS to retention, because we're a subscription based company, is critical, and it's like everything, right? If you don't have good retention, the company doesn't work. So even just having any kind of correlation between NPS and retention is enough to like illustrate the impact of something. So what I guess as like a tip or a trick, what I try and do is I try and connect whatever I'm doing back to those metrics that really drive the business. I could connect this back to something like I mean, just even using NPS as a pure measure doesn't matter, because it doesn't actually drive the value. It's like, well, NPS matters if it's correlated with retention. So I try and connect those two things together. And what I was able to show was that like NPS was correlated with retention. And so if you can show that correlation, then you can use NPS as like a proxy for retention. In terms of like having measurable impact on projects, so this is I would say this is also one of my key challenges, because it sometimes is it can be out of my hands to some extent, where if a business is not necessarily data driven to the point of they articulate problems first as a opportunity for some KPI, which is, like how like Facebook, Google, all those companies do it. It's like, okay, we want to increase this. How do we increase that? Versus we want to build this. What things should we measure with it? If it's the latter, it can be harder to do that, because the process may not have been designed to be measurable. So sometimes you just have to find creative ways to do it. And I would say the most important thing, I'm not going to maybe say a way to guarantee that it's measurable, but I would say the most like impactful way to get towards future projects being measurable is to produce something that's easily consumable by everyone. So for example, like something that I've made mistakes on in the past is we want to run some sort of like experiment, or we want to measure the impact of something, and I'll try and do it, the quote unquote like the right way. And I'll do like opportunity sizing, I'll do power analysis, all that stuff. And then by the time I finish that, it's like too late to measure, or it's like it's not interpretable by anyone else other than me and my team. That doesn't do anyone any good. If people don't buy into what you're selling in terms of like the information, it's useless. So you have to be able to produce something interpretable for people to buy in and like sort of understand that this is valuable, measuring this is valuable, and we should orient our projects and workflow around ensuring that things are measurable. That is like the best way to get that in the future. So you want to just like give people what they can easily consistently build on that.
Yeah, I love that. That makes sense. You said something really interesting. You mentioned like some projects will be a little bit top down in terms of defining what we're optimizing for. I see that with like really mature companies like the Googles, the Facebooks. Like
Mhm.
if you're a data scientist there, you're probably going to be walking into a very well organized project. You're going to be handed a business metric to optimize. You can correlate your model's metric to the business metric. It's very straightforward. But when you walk into these companies like you and I have been in, where you're building from the ground up and you're a data scientist, you could be handled something experimental. Maybe the task is like, go see if LLMs are valuable to our business, and you got to be creative, see where to apply that. And I think the key to doing that well, that I've seen people just knock it out of the park when they do it, is they will do exactly what you're saying. They will understand the business context and then go from there. You can't just like, oh, I can solve this with machine learning. I'll do it. Here's a model. It works. My F1 score is great. You got to understand the business context, and like you have to be the one to like define that metric from the top down, and that is so key. Really pulling.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And maybe doubling down on that. That is something that I've learned to be the biggest differentiator in success towards
Yeah,
not just data scientists but engineers in general. Is the ability to like properly frame a technical problem from non-technical aspects, or the ability to adjust requirements based on non-technical aspects. So I remember back when we were at Trump Club. I don't know if you remember him. His name was Vince. I remember Vince was like the technical
yeah,
lead on my team, and I remember thinking like Vince was like so good, like well respected at the company, like one of the best engineers, if not the best engineer. And I remember thinking like, what makes him so good? Because he was very strong technically, no doubt. But there was like something more than that. And I remember like thinking on this like a lot and like observing what he would do. And what he did so well was he would spend way more time than anyone else understanding what the stakeholders needed and like paying attention in the meetings, like with the PM and the stakeholders, instead of like, sitting on his computer, like doing his own thing. Like he
yeah,
actually cared and like understood what was going on. And because of that, could like fully take on like the requirements and adjust the project accordingly to fit those needs. Whereas no one else on our team did that. And so we were all dependent on like Vince to tell us like if what we were doing made sense or not. So that's something that I've learned, especially in data science, where you're typically not given the same like project or product support that you would have on a software team. And so I try and like actually interview for that. So like for when I hire, which is the thing that I care about the most in terms of like leading a team, is to interview specifically for this ability. Is not just solving a framed problem, but like how well can you take a loosely framed problem, turn it into a precisely framed problem, and then solve it? Because solving is sort of like, it's of all of that, it's the easier part, right? Like we've all taken data science courses, we can all build a classifier, we can all measure performance. That is very like standardized and like, built into like every data science curriculum. What's not typically baked in, or at least I have not seen it as much, is how do you frame the problem in the first place, and how do you do that? So that's what I try and interview for, because I think it's one of the biggest differentiators.
yeah. I 100% agree with that. And I know, like, for some people, it might feel a little bit outside of your job description, and you don't want to step on toes. Like maybe you have a great product manager there who should be doing that and is doing that. But if you do it as well and you put yourself in the shoes of your stakeholders and you learn that business, you're gonna be able to collaborate like a lot better with the people around you, and really just like you'll be able, like you're saying, like you'll be able to make decisions on your project, which leads to leadership roles. So it's a really good kind of career growth tip to hear. Cool. Well, let's jump into the next question. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how do you think about the most important things? Like, what are the most important things to do well as a data science leader?
Yeah, well, I already touched on it a bit, but again, doubling down on the things that matter. Hiring is, in my opinion, or in my experience, the most impactful thing you can do well. Hiring means, it influences who you bring on, and who you bring on really drives the success of your team. And, you can have suboptimal technical processes, you can have suboptimal workflows, you can have suboptimal stakeholders. It doesn't matter if you have good people. Good people can overcompensate for all of that. And the inverse is not true. You can't have average people, but a really good tech stack and expect that tech stack to make up for the average people. It's not going to
That's so
happen.
funny. I've always said that I'd rather work with good people than a good product, because if you're with good people, they will make that a good product. Doing things
For
like
sure.
and like understanding the stakeholders, defining the metrics. So I mean, I'm lucky to be working with good people and a good product. That's always what you want. But if you put the right people in place, it's really kind of incredible to see what they can do.
Yeah, 100%. Right. So like the product, in its current state isn't the final state. Otherwise, people wouldn't be working there anymore.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't need anyone, for sure. So, yeah, I spend a lot of time, or like mental effort on hiring. That's something that I've really like iterated on a bunch, definitely made a lot of mistakes early on in my career, my hiring manager career with hiring, not in the form of like when I say mistakes, not necessarily hiring bad people, but like suboptimal ways to go about it. So like, some things I would say that I've learned to differentiate myself from like most hiring managers is, um, for one thing, whenever I do a technical interview, I always embed it in a business or user context. So building on that framing, technical framing is, I don't care if you can solve a technically framed problem well, if you can't help frame it, because what that means is, suppose that you can't frame a problem and all you can do is solve like, a very easily understood problem, then that means that someone constantly has to like perfectly set up your projects for you. They have to like line up
And
the
Chat
dominoes for you to
GPT
knock
might be
down.
coming for you on that one.
Yeah,
It's
right.
possible. I don't know
Exactly.
yet, but they might.
Yeah, for sure. So I try and always embed that because, even for junior people, obviously
Mhm.
junior people are not going to be as equipped to do this well. But even for them, I want to see how they can do on it, because what I'm really evaluating is independence. Is like, how much can I give this person and like expect them to handle it on their own and come back when they need it? Um, Versus how much am I going to have to spend, watching over them, because if that's the case, like if I'm going to spend a lot of time just like managing and handholding, then what value is this person bringing? Because I could just do that myself and save everyone a bunch of time. So that's what I'm really like when I think about building a scalable team. I don't think about, hierarchy and things like that. I think about the people, because the people really like make the team scalable. It's like their own abilities do that, and then you can structure the teams around the people.
Yeah.
Kind of building on that point, another thing that I do is I try and not hire for overly rigid like requirements. Like for example, right now we're hiring for a data analyst, and I'm not looking for, okay, this person has to have had this experience or this specific skill set, or even like, if we found somebody who ended up being like a senior data analyst, fine, great. That's less important than I'm looking for somebody who can uh, address a certain set of problems that we have and be able to like solve them sufficiently on their own and ask for help when needed and things like that. And then once we hire that person, exactly how we frame their role will be somewhat dependent on that person that we hired. So I like to have a bit like looser of requirements when hiring, and then adjust the role based on that person. Because you can hire, I have a data analyst role open now. We might get two very different people through there. And the role shouldn't be the same just because like that's what I put it
Yeah.
on in the beginning. We should really adjust it. So I like to do that. I like to hire for people and adjust the role
Oh, wow.
accordingly. Same thing with teams.
You're building teams around people. You're not building people into teams. And that allows people to kind of showcase like the strongest skill sets and really be able to apply that wherever you put them. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, you know, I wouldn't say it's 100% that, where it's not like, I'm rearranging teams based off of
Yeah.
like a new hire that we have, but
You
it's
can't,
it's
but
it's a back and forth, right? It's like,
yeah, yeah.
we have like this loose requirement, we have this person, but we fit the team accordingly. And we hired two staff level people earlier this year in Q2 and did the same thing. It was like we brought them on. They were both staff level. One was an analytics engineer and one was a data engineer. And I kind of had expectations for what the roles would be. And then once we hired them and I got to know them better, it was like, that doesn't actually totally make sense. Let's adjust things based on like what these people's skill sets are.
Is this
And
going to
that's
be
worked well.
easier? Sorry, a quick question. Is it going to be easier
Yeah.
to do this at a smaller company versus the larger one?
Yeah, definitely. So I
Yeah.
would say that it's definitely easier to align, especially things like, if you're changing job titles or something like that.
Sure.
Also, if you have like rigid like management structures or specific swim lanes, it's definitely easier the smaller you go. But even when I was at Wayfair, we would do this, like
That's
what
good.
projects people get. Like, you can keep your same job title, your same compensation, all the stuff that like I can't change just on a whim. But what I can change is like, okay, well, here's your role within the projects that we have, things like that.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I know it's a tough job market for folks out there right now. And I hear some
Mhm.
people saying like, especially like early career, like they're looking at job descriptions and it says like 1 year of experience. It's like, well, how do you even get that? I have zero. I'm out of college. And I've always told people apply anyway. Like you never know if you're super like passionate, you've got the right skill set, you can show your aptitude for learning. You might be able to swing it anyway. So I'm curious, like, is that advice that you'd also give to people when you see like kind of the job description maybe not perfectly matching? Is it still kind of worth a shot?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I have like it's actually one of the things one of my biggest pet peeves about the job market in general is job descriptions. I think they are so vague that they're essentially meaningless.
Yeah.
And I always get irritated whenever I apply for jobs that like this doesn't tell me anything. It's so like, it's like happy go lucky, like everything is like, oh, we're this great company with this great culture, and here's, the role is like barely differentiated from like even like a non-technical role. And it's like, okay, what does this actually mean? What am I going to be doing on day to day? And you
Yeah.
have to get on a call with someone and ask them the questions that like they probably have 20 times a day with people. So that none of that makes any sense to me why it's like that. But in any case, yes, I would encourage people to apply. I think, you know, um, for me, what matters to me when I'm reviewing applications and things like that is definitely somebody who can tell me or explain to me through their resume or something why they're a good fit for this. Again,
Mhm.
I care less about the actual experience. What I want to know is like, why is this person a good fit? And if you can convince me of that, even though you don't have the experience, that's fine. I'm totally open
Yeah.
to that. For the day. Sorry, let me get some
Yeah.
coffee. I've got something in my
Yeah.
throat.
Go ahead.
For the data analyst role that we have, I actually told the recruiters who are sourcing for this, like, I care less about years of experience and I care more about like drive and like hunger to learn. So you'll
100%.
probably find that with people who are fresh out of college
Yeah.
because they're very hungry to prove themselves. They want to learn. They're kind of willing to, try new things and stuff like that. And for this type of a role where you're interfacing with like a bunch of different stakeholders who, um, are busy, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not that they're not difficult; they're actually great. But like it's tough to find time to like ask them for specific things because they're so busy. So you can't be afraid to like just walk up to their desk and things like
There
that.
you go. Yeah.
Um, so looking for someone who's just like very hungry, very eager, is willing to do stuff like that, willing to come into the office, which for us I love because we have an office with like 30 dogs in it. So it's kind of a
Of
blast.
course you do. That's so
Uh,
great.
yeah. Um, but in any case, yes, I would encourage people to apply.
Yeah.
I understand that like because of the current like job market and just in general, the way that people apply for jobs, you have to like, shotgun apply, where you apply for like 100 and hope to get two responses. Definitely encourage people like talk to others who are applying because what I've often found in candidates is that they don't realize that they're not the only ones who are applying to 1,000 jobs and not getting that heard back from anyone, and so they think it's like a problem with them. So definitely like know that that's not the case and that like everyone has that challenge. I remember when I was interviewing um, for my job at Wayfair, I remember interviewing and I kept like a really detailed spreadsheet. And even for me, who was like very experienced at the time,
Yeah.
had a lot of good options, the hottest job market like ever in terms of data science. I think I had like a maybe like 18% response rate for applications, and I wasn't applying for jobs that I wasn't qualified for. So like even then, 18%
Yeah.
being like the absolute like close to the maximum level. Um, in today's market, I'd probably have less than 5%. I would
100%.
guess. And then, that's with 10 years of experience.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's been my experience too. I've always tried to applied and just like see what sticks. Like once you're in the call with people and you're getting to know them and in the company, that's where you're really trying to assess if this is the right fit. But yeah, I remember my first job, super shotgun apply. That was like 10 years ago too. I think for every like 100 resumes I sent out, maybe I got like one response. And it is hard because you don't know, like, is it my resume? Is it me? But then you talk to other people, it's everyone, and it will follow you through your career. But it's good to kind of like narrow down what you're doing, what you like, and then it'll get easier. Well, I know we're getting
Yeah,
off track a
definitely.
little bit. I want to hear more about how you kind of like interview and assess people for these skills that we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So, building on that like technical framing part, I always, will take like a technical problem and embed it into a business context and see how they approach it. One of my favorite interviews that I've given, which I no longer give because I keep talking about it, and people know that it's coming, is this. I use data sets on Kaggle because they're like publicly available, like
Yeah.
have an open license and not like related to my company, so that you can tailor it to be fun. And so I find fun data sets to work with and use them as interviews. One that I really like is the heart attack prediction one. So it's like a data set of like 300 records, and it's got a bunch of like vital readings and other information of people who are at like a hospital, and it predicts their likelihood of, or you can build a classifier that predicts the likelihood of having a heart attack. So there's like a Y column that's like a 0 or a 1. Do they have a heart attack or not? And so, the standard problem to ask would be, okay, build a classifier that predicts whether or not someone's going to have a heart attack. And so, but if you think about that problem, what I would do is I would modify it slightly. And instead of asking that in its exact form, I would say, you're working for an emergency room, or you're working with an emergency room, and you want to help them build a decision process that prioritizes patients who are likely to have a heart attack. So you can think of it as you've got, X number of patients in a room, and you've taken all the readings, and you need to know how to prioritize which ones to like help first to like prevent, or provide care to the fastest when they have a heart attack. So that like subtle change of like problem framing.
Yeah.
And then I throw in some other like a couple other like constraints or information, like you can only let 10 people in at a time or something like that. Just that like subtle change really changes what drives success in this problem. Because in order to do well on this, you have to understand that context before you get to the technical part. Because if you don't and you skip past it, um, you're not going to solve the thing that it is asking for.
But you could
So,
still
for
build a good
example,
model, and I think that's where
you
people get
cut
it wrong.
absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
a lot
What if
a
my
lot of
F1
people do
score
that.
is great?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I see so often is people just they go like, boom, train test split. They start looking at the
Uh-huh.
data, they start building a model, a pipeline, and I'm like, I try and like reel them back in, like, hey, you missed this part, and if you don't address that, you're going to run into issues. And so what I want to see is people like sit there, read through it once or twice, ask some clarifying questions, write down what they're about to do, and then like ask me, like, is this a good solution? If you do that, you're pretty much guaranteed to pass the interview because you've aligned on a strategy with me, which is what I'm really interviewing for. I'm not interviewing for your technical, like what, yeah, exactly. Like you said, like what your F1 score is. I don't care. Couldn't
Yeah.
care less about that. What I care about is, can you frame this well and understand the framing, so that when you get to the point that I know you can do well, I'm confident that it's going to go well.
Okay,
So,
so here's a
and
question
I
for
also,
you.
yeah, sure.
Sorry, quick
Go for
question.
it.
Um, so I can learn how to train a good model with a good F1 score. I can find material online. I could go to school for it. It's a very tangible technical skill with a lot of materials that I can find, and I can just like level up that skill set and get good at it. How do you recommend people get good at this other piece of things where it's really like framing things in the business context? What is an approach to leveling up that skill? Because I don't think it's just like a natural skill. Some people do have a little bit of a natural business knack, and that's always great. But I do think these skills are learnable. And I'm curious how you'd recommend people go kind of level that up.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it typically starts with like first understanding the business context. But to answer your question about like how do you get good at doing this translation, what I would do is actually focus on building models where you understand the business or user aspect already. So
I
like
love
one
that.
common example might be college admissions. Like pretty much everyone in most people in data science have been to college, or at least have applied or understand the concept of it. And so you could say, okay, suppose you want to build an algorithm to rank college applications. Find some data set that has like grades and stuff, and then think about how you would, like, if you were a college admissions decision process, how you would approach it. Like, what would your
You are the
internal
customer now. You're
sort of
putting
model
yourself in
be?
these customer shoes. Yeah.
Exactly. And what you'll find is that, oh, accuracy may not actually be the best thing here. There's this like a different strategy is going to work. And so what you want to do is use yourself as the sort of expert and build towards your own like intuition or what your own model is for what success looks like, and
Yeah.
then like and articulate that and then build. So it's really about understanding, articulating, and then building and getting into a habit of doing that.
That is awesome. I hope everyone listening is like as excited as I am to hear that, because that I've seen work so well. Trunk Club was like that for me, because like I love shopping, I love clothing. We're working for this like personalized clothing styling service. It was so exciting. I was a customer. I had strong opinions of like what a good customer experience would be for me. And you're just excited about the data that you're using. So whatever it is for people, whether it's like sports or fashion or maybe politics. There's so many like, cool things that you can just find data sets. There's so many cool data sets out there. Just find data sets and put yourself in the customer's shoes, like be the customer, build it for yourself, use it, optimize it. Tell me about the best differentiator for high performing data science. What does that look like? That's cool.
Yeah. So I think the biggest differentiators are something we already talked about, which was ability to technically frame a problem. That is number one, in my opinion. That's a number one differentiator. Some other aspects are, this is, I think, true to everyone, again, not just data science, but like how well you can just let go of your own ego.
Mm,
I still struggle with this every day. And I think, few people have really perfected it, but like,
yeah.
if you really want to get better at things, you have to be able to learn like what your insecurities are and like how to mitigate that in order to learn better. So if you can figure out a way to just like detach yourself from your work so that you can understand how to improve it, that's really going to drive your career faster than anything else. Is just understand looking at your own yourself from like an external viewpoint will
Mm-hmm.
really it'll help highlight the things you're good at and things you're not good at, and will allow you to focus on those things that you're not good at. So I think, again, something I interview for is I look for people who take feedback well, or at least can consider alternative perspectives. So
Yeah.
the way that I bake this into an interview is even if the candidate does exactly what I would have done, and I totally agree with everything, it's like perfect. I will insert myself into the process and force a, oh, here's something else I would try, or like I might try something different. Basically, I create a point of disagreement just to see what happens, because a lot of times what I'll see is people get real defensive, or they like won't take what I'm saying seriously, or they say no, like they dismiss it. And that to me is a huge red flag. Like I want someone,
Yeah.
even if I'm saying is a terrible idea, I want someone to like hear me, understand it, and then be able to like gracefully respond with, that's a terrible idea, as
Yeah.
opposed to just like
Yeah.
dismissing it or something. Because what I need is a good collaborator and someone who can, hear ideas not just from me, but from everyone else.
I love that. We're all going to have terrible ideas. We need someone that's going to call us out
Oh
on
yeah.
that and vice versa.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have great ideas that we articulate very poorly. And so if you can help people like peel back the layers and articulate it, you might actually get to a good idea. So it's a good skill set to have. Well, cool. I think we got through some really great content here. I learned a ton. Jack, this is incredible. Like your experience and what's got you here and kind of the learnings that you shared with us was really, really valuable. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate your time, and yeah, have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, Claire. Really happy to be on. Appreciate it.